meeting that we have. My name is Jenny Willardson. I am a commercial real estate broker here in the Valley. And I started this coalition because I was hearing a lot of issues that our business owners were having that are my clients. And so I thought, we really need a place where we can all come together and talk through these problems and kind of come up with a community to solve problems. So today our topic is on construction and what to do if you want to build a property for your business. I've been hearing this a lot from clients, and they just don't know where to start. They're not developers, they're not builders. So, no worries, come on in. So this is going to be kind of like development 101. Like if you have no background in construction or development, what should you do if you want to build a building for your business? Okay, so first of all, I need to give a shout out to Matanuska Valley Federal Credit Union. They sponsored our meeting today, so thank you very much. We also they've brought some really amazing cookies over here from Dadda's Batch in Palmer, so that's from the credit union as well. So we appreciate them bringing yummy treats for us also. So don't leave without grabbing cookies. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists here today. We really appreciate you guys coming. So we have Alex Strawn from Borough. And what is your position in the borough?
So I'm the Planning and Land Use Director.
Okay, awesome. So you're exactly the man we want to talk to. And then we have Derek Miller from Matanuska Valley Federal Credit Union.
Yep.
And tell us about yourself.
I am a commercial loan officer at Valley Federal Credit Union.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
And then we have Crystal Nygard from the City of Wasilla.
And I'm the deputy administrator. I work hand in hand with the mayor, and I've been blessed with planning.
And then we have Brad Hanson with City of Palmer.
Yeah, hi. I'm the Director of Community Development at the City of Palmer.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so today, first before we get started, I want to remind you that these meetings are for you. So when you have questions or you want further clarification on something, please feel free to ask those questions. We're here to answer whatever question you have. So we want you to get the most out of it, okay? So feel free to come in on the discussion. All right, so first of all, first I want to talk to you, Derek.
Yes.
So the very first thing you do before you even consider building something is to know if you can afford it, right? So let's say exactly. So let's say I own a business, I sell widgets, and I really need to be in my own space. I'm tired of paying rent. I want to have my own space. So I see a piece of land and I just know that is where my business needs to be. I won't be able to build anything for at least a few years. So how can I acquire this piece of land for future construction of my business if I can't pay for it in cash?
Right. Well, there's a couple different ways about going about it. But first off, I would always recommend you going and talking to your lending institution and discussing with them the whole process. Because we can definitely lend on the land itself, which is good. We usually require equity down, so that's something you always have to think about. You can't just go in and unfortunately finance 100% of the purchase of the land. So usually on land itself, if it's raw land, undeveloped, we're going to require, anywhere from 30 to 40% down on the land itself. And the terms on the land are going to be shorter than that if there's a constructed building on it. So keep that in mind too. But what we like to do is talk about your goals. Walk into your banker or your loan officer, talk about your goals and what you want to accomplish and say, hey, I know this isn't what I want to do right now, right at this moment, because I don't have the ability to, but what's it going to take to do this at year 3, year 5, year 6? And then we can kind of discuss that. Because the last thing we want to do is to say, yeah, let's buy this land. Let's go ahead and do this and develop this for you. And then realize you buy the land, you're making loan payments on it. You come in a year or 2 later and you talk about, hey, this is the building I want to construct. And it's just not feasible. So the last thing we want to do is have you get into that. But we can lend on the land. Like I said, usually require 30 to 40% down on something like that. Usually a 10-year term is usually pretty standard on land itself.
Okay, is it amortized over the 10 years?
Yes, sometimes depending on where it is in, if it's in the core area, it really depends, and there's a lot of different variables that go into it. But amortization, we can usually stretch it about 15 years max on the amortization side on just land itself. Yep.
Okay, and then how do rates compare for a piece of land?
Compared to a building itself.
Yeah.
What Matt Valley does on the land side, we usually have a range between development and land. So land's going to be a little bit more risky. So obviously the rate is probably going to be a little higher. So for example, our rate range right now for real estate, commercial real estate, is between 675 and 775. Now that obviously is depending on prime. So prime's been kind of, as everybody knows, has been skyrocketing like crazy the last 12 months. So that goes into effect as well. But the land's probably going to be on the higher end, when commercial real estate's probably going to be on the lower end of that spectrum.
Okay, very good. Okay, and then what about you qualifying as a business? What does the credit union look at
Yep.
to see if you would qualify?
On the commercial side, and Norm can attest to this, cash is king. Cash flow. So, that's really what we're going to look at. Historical cash flow to make sure that the business is viable to make the loan payment. So that's the big thing. Cash flow is big. Equity into the project is obviously going to be really big as well, which in turn affects the collateral position. So those are going to be the main things. Liquidity of the business is going to be big as well. So it's difficult, especially if you've only been in business for 12 months, to come in and say, hey, I really want to develop this $1.5 million project. It's kind of like, oof. That's a little bit difficult because you only have 12 months or 18 months of historical revenue that we can go off of, so that's a little bit tough. In some instances, we might be able to go, SBA, or maybe do some of those other programs and projects that we then might be able to get something like that done. But there's a lot more paperwork, a lot more fees, a lot more other things involved with something like that.
Okay. So if you're a brand new business and you want to acquire a piece of land, are you just going to be looking at personally how much cash flow and net worth you have?
We look at both ends, actually, now that you bring that up. So we look at not only a business picture, but a global picture as well. So we obviously want to make sure the business is viable to make the loan payment. But in some instances, we have worked things out to where if it is kind of on a newer end, but let's say one of the owners or maybe yourself is just a side business and you have a W-2 wage or a different wage and you're still planning on keeping that wage, we can sometimes qualify you based on your personal income as well. It just depends. Like I said, commercial, there's a lot of different variables that go into play there, but there are options, I guess, in that instance too.
Okay. And then what about, does the credit union look at what you're intending to do with the
funds?
Well, with the land.
Oh.
As to whether or not they would.
That obviously is a question that we ask. If you cash flow and the value of the property is there, the biggest concern that we have is, hey, are we going to get paid back? That's going to be the biggest concern. If your goal is, hey, I want to build on this in 3 years, and in 5 years it doesn't happen, and in 7 years it doesn't happen, as long as you're making your loan payment to us, that's not really going to really affect it there, I guess. So really the intended use of the property doesn't go into as much of a factor as the cash flow and the value of the property itself.
Okay.
So.
Great. Okay. So then, say I buy the piece of land. I've been paying my payments for a few years, and I'm ready to start construction.
Sure.
Can I use my equity in the land for the down payment on construction?
Yes, and actually on the project itself, and this is something that we always try to get very upfront, and this is why we like to talk about your goals and your plans at the very beginning, because we do require 25 to 30% equity in the overall project. So that can be equity in the land. If you're doing $1 million project, we're going to require $250,000 to $300,000 cash for equity into the project itself. So if you buy the land and the land's bought free and clear and it's a $300,000 piece of land, that can be counted as your equity towards the project.
Okay.
So that has to be considered as well.
Is there anything else that you can consider for equity besides cash
There-
or land?
I guess in that instance, you can use Other land, I guess, if you absolutely wanted to, that's kind of unconventional, I guess. Usually you like to see it in the project itself, but if you have other collateral, we can either use that as collateral, or maybe we say, hey, go get a lien, a loan on that to go towards the equity of the project. That's usually a lot cleaner than that way. We're not taking this particular building and this particular building and this particular building all in one loan. It's doable. It's just not quite as clean, I guess, in that instance. But those are the main things: is the cash and the land itself.
Okay.
So.
What about like business assets or accounts receivable?
We can lend on those, but the issue with lending on like equipment or assets or receivables, the terms we can do on those loans are considerably shorter. So the fact that those are considerably shorter, those eat up your cash flow significantly. So that will dictate on how much we can lend on the construction loan itself. So we can look at that option. And when it comes to receivables, there's a lot that goes into that. It's very highly monitored. You have to check the balances of it either on a monthly or a quarterly basis. So there's a lot involved with using receivables. So that is an option, but then again, we don't really do that very often just because of the constraints since the terms are so short.
Yeah. Okay, and then what about terms on a construction loan?
Yep.
What is the length of the loan? What is the rate?
It all depends on the project. I mean, obviously, we work very closely with the builder of the project itself because depending on what you're building, I mean, if it's a single family dwelling or if it's Chepos, I mean, it just depends upon how long that construction term is, and we can usually facilitate that. So normally a project's going to be anywhere from, depending on what it is, 6 to 18 months. That's the typical term of the project, and we usually match our construction term roughly the same time frame, maybe add a couple 3 months just to be on the safe side in case of overruns and timing and everything else. Our typical product is we offer a construction to permanent financing. So what we'll do is our terms are 15 years, typically, depending on what the building is, 20 to 25-year amortizations. But the first part will be a construction phase. So it's usually 12 to 18 months in the construction phase. And what goes into that is you'll obviously have draw requests, and it's a drawdown line of credit essentially. So you get $1 million construction loan. Every month you draw that down, you pay interest only on that 12-month period. And then once that 12-month period is over, then it goes into your principal and interest financing. Right now, our construction is a prime plus 1.5. So like prime's at 7.75. So at this point, it's going to be 9.25 for construction right now, and that's going to be variable. So if prime goes up again in 2 months when you're in the middle of the project, you're going to be paying another 0.5% or 0.25%, whatever the prime is at that time. But once you're through that, then you get into your principal and interest payments, which we do 5-year variable rates on our fixed terms.
Okay, got it. Let's see. What about for FF&E? So furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Yep.
Going into the new project. Can that be financed in the construction loan, or is that going to be a separate loan?
So the FF&E is in my experience is always usually separate. I mean, I have not seen anything to where they've actually included the FF&E on the actual budget itself. And if they do, a lot of times it has to get appraised. So even if it is included in the budget itself, the appraiser is going to go through there and value it, and we're going to use whatever is less of the two, either the cost of construction or the value of the appraisal. So if you have a $3 million project and there's $200,000 in FF&E in that $3 million project, the appraiser is going to come in and look at it and say, that's really not part of this building, so it's going to be $2.8 million. We're going to use the $2.8 million appraisal in that instance, and that's what we're going to be able to lend on. And we could probably look at lending on the FF&E, but again, the terms are going to be considerably shorter on that $200,000 or $300,000, whatever it's at, and a lot more down. We can't lend 70% on FF&E. It could probably be something similar to 60% or something else. Yeah.
What about for soft costs, like for architecture, engineering, those types of parts of the project?
Yep.
Is that part of the construction loan as well?
That depends. Another depends. If it's included in the project, in the budget and the project itself, we can definitely submit that. And as long as the appraiser includes that in his valuation, we can definitely use that. Again, we've had instances where sometimes the appraiser will look at that and say that's a soft cost, we can't include that. So it really depends on what the appraiser is going to come in at. If the appraiser says, yep, that's part of the cost, we'll include that in your budget, then we can use that equity as part of the cost.
So then when you are underwriting the project as a lender, if the project is going to be owner occupied,
Yep.
single user, do you underwrite differently since you're not going to be
Having different
having
leases.
different leases?
Yep. Not necessarily. I mean, yes and no. Again, we are going to look at obviously the cash flow of the owner occupant. We're going to look at in a typical unit if you have a multi-unit complex where you have 10 different leases, we're going to take those leases into account on what your income's going to be on that building. If a single owner occupant in that building, then we're obviously going to take whatever lease agreement, whatever the lease agreement you're going to have between the owner of the building and the operating company. But if the owner of the operating company and the building are the same, we're going to be taking the owner of the building as a guarantor anyway. So that cash flow, we're going to look at the cash flow of the business itself to make sure that the business can support the cash flow or the debt payment, I should say, of the new building is how we usually look at owner occupied.
Okay, and for that debt payment coverage, are you looking for a DSCR?
1.25.
1.25?
Yep,
Okay.
yep, that's across the board. So
Okay.
1.25 debt service coverage. So again, there are instances to where, let's say at the very beginning, if you don't have it fully leased up, or if you do have a multi-unit that you're looking at, sometimes we can say, okay, this is the value. We look at different economic factors and say, okay, we know it's not currently leased up now, but your other income that you have on a global standpoint is enough to cover that payment. We can look at that option too, where we've done that in the past. It doesn't have to be fully leased. There's a lot of different factors that go into play.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question.
Yep.
Was if there's units that are not leased
Mhm.
when you're buying it, you can't take potential.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. We have accepted obviously letter of intent, especially if it's a project. Oops, no, it's not over my water. Especially if you're part of a project that is not a current building, you're building all brand new. Obviously, those leases are going to come in one at a time usually, or kind of more along a 3 to 6 month process. So in that instance, we don't require it to be fully leased in order to lend on it, but we do require that it to be at a 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. So we can rely on other income that can be the owners guaranteeing the note that have side income, or maybe some other investor comes in and says, hey, I want to be 15% owner of this. You can use my income to help qualify this loan. We can look at other avenues of revenue to cover that debt service coverage.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
My next question is, are you seeing very much new construction that is being done by a developer or an investor as opposed to owner users in our current market?
I see a lot, in my personal experience, I see a lot more. I do a lot more on the investment side. I see a lot more people doing the multi-units, whether it's multi-family, whether it's multi-business, where it's several units, where they're going to be leasing out units. So the investor side is really what I've been seeing. There are some instances where obviously you have a business who wants to go buy a building and run their business out of there instead of leasing, paying a lease payment. But I find this maybe quite a bit less than the investor side. That's what I see at least.
Okay, so the owner is not going to be occupying.
That's just what I've seen. I mean, the more often than not, and maybe other loan officers or bankers have seen it differently. But in my personal interest, that's what I've seen.
Okay, yeah, good to know. Okay, let's move on to our cities and borough. Because you would not want to start a project and then the city comes along and says, what are you doing? So you've got to make sure you do all your due diligence ahead of time before you get too far into a project, right? So the first thing that I want to talk to, and I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of go through a few different points and have each of you kind of say from your perspective what a landowner would have to do before they start a project. Okay, so the first one is going to be land use. You can't just build whatever you want, wherever you want. Can you, Alex?
The lender might have a little bit something against that depending where you're building,
Right,
just letting you know.
Exactly. So Alex, if I came to you and I said, I've got this piece of land, it's under the borough's jurisdiction, it's not within the city limits, I'm gonna sell widgets, what would you say to me?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we have a new tool that, it's an old tool that is now new again. It's the land use permit. So for a time there, for a couple of years, around 2010, we had a mandatory land use permit throughout the borough that for anything over 480 square feet, you have to get this permit. And it's essentially a zoning clearance. We look at where you're building, sort of where it's located on the property, what you're doing. We make sure that it sort of, based on what you submit to us, is in compliance with all the laws. After that was sort of gutted or repealed, there's still a big demand for it to say, hey, I still want to know that this is okay. And so we were processing them after they were repealed. And we were told you can't do that. You can't just make up this permit that doesn't exist anymore. So about 6 months ago, the Matsu Borough actually brought back the land use permit and made it voluntary. So I would actually direct you to that. It's actually like a $50 permit. It's very cheap. And you give us an indication of what you're going to do, and we look at all the rules and regulations to make sure that you can do it. So we have setbacks. You're going to need a driveway permit. If you're in a flood zone, you need to get a flood permit. We do have areas with special restrictions called special land use districts that may have some restrictions on what you're going to do. But for the most part, if you're going to do a commercial business, the one thing you know you're going to need is a fire review either by the state of Alaska or by the Matsu Borough, depending on where it's at. You're going to need to meet setbacks, and you're going to have to get a driveway permit. That is for sure. There may be other things based on where you're at and what you're going to do. There are some uses, like if you're going to do a gravel permit or a junkyard or a racetrack, you may need extra permitting, like a conditional use permit. But generally, if you're just going to build widgets, those are the three things you need.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll talk a little bit more about
Okay.
those in a second. Okay, Crystal, I want to sell widgets in the city of Wasilla.
The
What should
tough
I
one.
do?
Well, don't go to him first. Come to us first.
Yeah.
Right, because we don't, so as most of you know, Wasilla's got about 10 zones, and so it could be a residential zone or a rural residential zone or a commercial zone. And every zone has its own characteristic, and so it's really important, not only the zones, but certain areas like the overlay within downtown Wasilla, there are certain businesses that are not allowed in that overlay. And we've had people come to us that have already signed the paperwork and they said, well, we're gonna open this shop. And we said, oh, that's not allowed in this one area. So it's very important that you come and talk to the planning department about what your plans are. And so unlike Palmer, we have land use, but we do not have building codes. That is provided by the borough through the fire chief. So if you build something and you want to occupy it, that's something you got to work through with the fire department. However, somewhat similar to the borough, we have different types of permits. We automated that last year. So you can go right onto the citywasilla.gov to planning, and then you can either do a administrative permit or a conditional use permit. We will require some landscaping. I'm sure you've heard of that already. We do require certain kinds of aesthetics. As you might know or not know, we want to make sure that we don't have a pink house in the middle of a nice commercial area. So you can do all that online. However, I just caution you to do that right off the get-go because it's 10 o'clock at night. You go online, you're like, well, I think it's this $500 one because for some reason people think if I pay more for a permit, it's the right one. And that's not always the case. Okay, and accounting does not like to give refunds. I don't know why, but anyway, just to kind of give you a little insight of what we have learned. And so then once they get the permit, then you have to have a business license. You have to have a business license with the city. You have to have one with the borough. You have to have one with the state. And then if you are going to open a restaurant, you may have to have a you may have to have an alcohol license, and you have to have so many parking spots for the anticipated amount of tables that you were gonna have. Now, we just had a situation where a new franchise came in. All the other franchises, they have sit down, but the particular piece of real estate that they signed a lease for, we were short 2 parking spots for them to have dine in. We went to the next mall and asked if we could rent some of their parking slips, and they said, no, we need those parking slips. So it's really, really critical that you understand those kind of things before you go get the money. Not that we don't want them to see you.
Right.
But,
Well, we want them to have approval with you as well, because the last thing we want to do is lend money and them not able to do it. So
right.
So do you two work together usually? Like, are you gonna check in?
Normally what's going to happen is we're going to check with the borrower to say, hey, have you checked with the city to make sure all this is set up? And they'll say yes or no. And if they say no, well, we'll tell them, go to the city. Well, we can underwrite your financials, but go to the city and make sure all this is done before we get too much further down the process, because we don't want to waste their time, and
Right.
they hopefully don't want to waste ours either.
And then once that matrimony is made, then we all have this celebration, and it's called a pre-app meeting. And we invite even the bankers to come in and say, what's the plan? And even what's your 5-year plan? I mean, we have another situation where a restaurant's done very, very well, and they want to just move down the way and build another structure. Well, we don't have water that far, and we don't have sewer that far. Every restaurant I know likes to have a bathroom. So it's really important that we get that out in front right at the get-go. Plus, they have to pave a road to get to it, because the road is not paved right now. Those things are really important to get up front, because they are added costs. Banks might like that,
Yes.
finance, but
Yeah.
we don't like to tell you after the fact.
Okay, so City of Palmer.
City of Palmer has land use regulations. They've had them for 50 years. Like City of Wasilla, R1, which is the least dense, all the way up to industrial, airport commercial, airport other zoning, and the mixed use zone in the airport. So yeah, we have lots and lots of land use regulations as it to each specific zone. Okay, when you're talking about development in the City of Palmer, the most important thing is to come and talk to the Community Development Department right up front. Like Crystal said, the City of Palmer is responsible for the building department as well. We do inspections, we do plan review, and so it's all a part of the developmental process. Additionally, we have a deferment from the state, which we're able to do the fire marshal piece of the plan review, which commercial developers understand the roadblocks sometimes when you're going to the state, and how slow they may be. So we're kind of a 3-week, hopefully from start to finish. A part of this developmental process and this meeting is making and letting developers know what their responsibilities are with other departments within the city. For instance, Public Works handles this extension of sewer and water to the spots, the driveway permits, some of those other things that are real important and critical to the ultimate success of the development. And so, it's comprehensive, and we like to think that we're there to help, we're there to facilitate any type of what you have going. And so, in a nutshell, that's what the land use is in the City of Palmer.
Great. Okay, so what about the structure itself? How high can you build the building? How tall can my widget store be? Can I have other tenants there? Is there a specific building type that I can build? What about from the borough?
Yeah, so I'm representing the Borough Planning Department, so we don't do fire, like the fire marshal permits. So they may have their own requirements. If you're going to build really tall, you may have to do some, whatever they require. But unless you're going over